Back. We welcome Ms. Reza from PSPC. I understand you have a 5-minute opening statement. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Permettez-moi tout d'abord de souligner.
Allow me to begin by acknowledging that we are meeting on the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. As the Deputy Minister of Public Services and Procurement Canada, I am pleased to be here to discuss the Auditor General's report into the development of the ArriveCAN application, as well as the findings of the Procurement Ombudsman on this topic. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Dominique Laporte, Assistant Deputy Minister, Procurement Branch, Catherine Poulin, Assistant Deputy Minister, Departmental Oversight Branch, and Ron Cormier, Director General, Business and Technology Solutions Sector. Mr. Chair, PSPC is the government's central purchasing agent, ensuring departments and agencies have the goods and the services necessary to deliver on their various mandates. In this role, among other things, my department establishes and administers central procurement tools, such as standing offers and supply arrangements. Client departments and agencies can then access these tools directly for their procurements. Mr. Chair, in the case of ArriveCan, PSPC provided procurement support to the Canada Border Services Agency to procure professional services that were used for many purposes, including to develop the application.
The Procurement Ombud found that certain practices related to the procurement of professional services were inconsistent with government policy and the government's commitment to fairness, openness, and transparency. 8 recommendations from that report were addressed to PSPC. The Auditor General's report makes one recommendation that implicates PSPC, namely that PSPC and the CBSA should ensure that tasks and deliverables are clearly defined in contracts and related task authorizations. Mr. Chair, we are committed, and I need to underscore that word committed, to ensuring that the lessons learned from the reports of the Ombud and Auditor General are turned into concrete actions to make certain that the deficiencies uncovered do not occur again. We have taken many steps. We have already introduced several new control measures that begin to address these recommendations. In November 2023, PSPC temporarily suspended all delegated authorities to the departments and agencies, including those of CBSA, to authorize professional services-based task authorizations. Later in December, PSPC provided direction to its procurement officers to ensure that task authorizations include a focus on clear tasks and deliverables. Now, federal departments must formally agree to a set of terms and conditions to obtain access to select professional service methods of supply. Key changes also include the use of new contract provisions to increase costing and subcontractor transparency and provide important clarifications on the roles of departments when using these instruments. The intent is to improve consistency in practices. Our department is also updating its guidance to aid other departments in procuring effectively and responsibly when using PSPC procurement instruments under their own authority. Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Chair, we recognize that there is a real and immediate need to strengthen specific areas of our procurement processes related to professional services. We will continue to build upon the actions I've outlined today to improve the Government of Canada's procurement process and practices.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you coming back to OGA once again. We'll start with Mrs. Block for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. We do look forward to being able to put some questions to you and get some answers. Today, we learned from the media that your department withheld information from the minister on the overspending of ArriveCan. It would appear you did not, and my questions are being directed to Ms. Reza. It would appear that you did not brief the minister on ArriveCan or the scandal surrounding ArriveCan. Why was this left out of his briefing document?
thank you very much for the question. I believe in July 23, when the briefing material was put together, there was an extensive list of immediate topics that were coming forward, including some defense procurement, some health and safety around bridges, the McKinsey reports. There was many different pieces ongoing. So at that time, the AG and the OPO were starting to do their review, and it was in flight, and it was considered perhaps in the first tranche, not the immediate. It became much more hot once again as the months progressed, and the minister was briefed accordingly.
So you left out a pretty pertinent issue that I believe any one of us as parliamentarians, were we in the minister's shoes, would have wanted to hear about. When did the minister ask for a briefing on ArriveCan? Just the date.
We'll have to come back with a precise date over the fall of 2023 with the allegations of Bottler and the various elements of the spending around ArriveCan and the audits that were being done by the AG and the procurement ombudsman. More information was made available and more briefings were scheduled to his minister's office as well.
So when did you inform the minister about the cost overruns of ArriveCan?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. We'll have to come back with a precise breakdown of timing. Again, the cost overruns and the budget of ArriveCan is the CBSA's purview, So we really looked at it from providing the background on the procurement vehicles that PSPC put in place for CBSA.
So while you said that this fell under CBSA's purview, you provide oversight to every single department across government for procurement. And I find it really hard to believe that in July of 2023, when the $60 million cost of the app was already baked in, so to speak, and you didn't think to bring this up to the minister, and you can't even provide us with the dates when he first asked for the briefing or when you advised him of this issue, knowing that you were coming to committee today and we were going to be asking about ArriveCan. That's incredible to me that you didn't come prepared with more information about ArriveCan and the involvement of your department, given what we heard from the Auditor General and the procurement ombuds about the oversight that your department provides. So when did you brief the minister about GC Strategies? Again, we're talking about the two-person IT company that did no actual work on IT and got paid $20 million for ArriveCan. Was he briefed on that?
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. As the fall moved into November, December, as more and more allegations were coming to fruition in terms of getting ready to come to OGO, briefings took place in terms of GC Strategies and ArriveCan with the minister.
So can you just repeat that last part?
Sure. In preparation of our committee appearance, I believe it was in November, ahead of that, discussions were taking place, as I noted earlier, in terms of ArriveCan, briefing the minister's office, in terms of GC Strategies on the contractual elements.
So to be really clear, July 2023, the minister is appointed. The price tag of $60 million is pretty much already baked in. We knew it was at least $54 million. You knew about GC Strategies because that had already been in the news. They had already received or been paid $9 million on ArriveCan at this point. And the minister didn't ask for a briefing, and you didn't provide one until November?
Thank you very much. Again, the minister arrived in July. There was many different materials that were being provided, including on procurement, defense procurement, on McKinsey, on many different topics that were decision-making time from the fall, September, October, November, from the time that the minister appeared in front of OGO to discuss it. Briefings were taking place in terms of GC Strategies, in terms of our contracting vehicles, in terms of PSPC's involvements, roles, and responsibilities with his office, and then more frequently with the minister.
So as the deputy minister, did you have a role in what went into the briefing binder for the new minister?
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. I wasn't a deputy minister at the time.
That is our time. Mr. Shawari, please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be sharing my time with MP Atwin. Madam Reza, in your opening statement, you talked about that PSPC provided procurement support to Canada Border Service Agency to procure professional services that were used for many purposes, including development of application. Can you very quickly tell me what type of services, what type of support did your department provide?
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. Very quickly, in the early days of the pandemic in April and June 2020, the Department of CBSA approached PSPC for assistance in terms of having IT specialists, staff augmentation in-house to help them keep the border open across a variety of business lines. They noted low-value shipments, applications for travelers, and I think cargo.
Okay.
So the first few contracts and the first approach was for staff augmentation.
Okay, so very good. For staff augmentation. Now, it looks like that staff augmentation happened through GC Strategies, which we all know by now is a two-man shop, that they did not do any works. However, my question to you is why our procurement processes are so cumbersome that we cannot actually have a process in place that the actual resources who are going to do the job that got contracted by GC Strategy to come and do the job we either could reach out to them or they could reach out to us to be able to do this job.
Thank you very much for the question. Traditionally, staff augmentation works in a similar manner where you bring in a temp agency and they're taking on the burden of finding the resources. Given what we've seen in the various, and there are many shops that do this across the system. So there's about 635 IT firms that provide staff augmentation services, and it is a competitive field, and it is pre-qualified, and it is a tool that is constantly refreshed. Now, we're looking at other ways of doing that where we can have more direct access to resources, but just in terms of efficiency and capacity, this has been a traditional method.
Yeah, but can it be as simple as PSPC starting up a very comprehensive database of all IT resources, qualify them, and having ready at their fingerprint that they could do the job that the two-man show, and they charge 15 to 30%? What is it stopping PSPC to be able to do that?
So thank you very much for the question. I think that this is something that we can look at and take on to see whether or not we can fill this need and if there would be value to the client departments.
The rest of my time goes to Madam Atman.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Drahouri. And thank you to our witnesses, of course, for being with us today, and I hope you're feeling better, Ms. Reza. I'm going to focus a little bit on some of the documentation issues that have really come to light. Among the common themes between the reports of the Auditor General and the Procurement Ombud is that lack of documentation. So no written justification for many decisions, lack of specifics and task authorizations. Considering this, the Auditor General referred to us as some of the worst bookkeeping that she'd ever seen. What is PSPC, as the contracting authority, doing to ensure that documentation is appropriately managed?
We're doing several things. We have, of course, been looking over our own documentation practices and our record keeping because this is a very difficult situation. I mean, procurement officers are very well trained. They do an excellent job. This was in a particular time and place where they didn't have access to their normal workstations, their computers, their files, the supply manual. What we have underway now is an e-procurement system that will shift what is normally a very paper-based approach to procurement into an electronic repository. We're hoping this will provide an evidentiary trail, but even more so, PSPC is taking measures within its own procurement shop to be able to have a senior executive responsible for looking at procurement documentation and ensuring that there's training and the tools available to the officers to make sure they're well trained.
Great, thank you. Of course, another big concern is addressing cost overruns and kind of the price tag. So you've mentioned some of the steps that you've taken since November to address some of these issues. Can you elaborate more specifically on how this is going to address costs? So starting with the fact you've taken away the delegated authority for task authorizations from all departments and agencies with new rules, agreements, and training put into place. Can you elaborate on that specifically and what it would mean with these new agreements now in place?
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. It's really going to provide, hopefully, from a procurement perspective, one of the key things we heard from the Procurement Ombudsman and the Auditor General was the quality of the documentation around the task authorization. So we're hoping this will bring a lot more hygiene within the system to be clear what is being requested and called up, as well as why there is a need. So that will hopefully provide more visibility in terms of accounting for various resources and services, and really fundamentally provide more support to the clients, departments whose responsibility it is to account for the budget and the authority to spend the money.
Thank you. That's good for me.
Mrs. Vignola, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Chair. Chair, I would like to advise that I will file the next motion, and I will read it very slowly. here and now, given that the Auditor General has determined that ArriveCAN app cost at least $60 million to the taxpayer, and that the management of public funds by Canadian Border Services Agency on Arrive Canada is disastrous. 2, that CBSA is now working to set up a new IT system to officially register the applications of tax approaches for foreign providers, the management of the funds of the agency, CGRA, and that this new system will come into effect on the 13th of May 2024, despite the very short test period and piloting of this project. And 3, that Buy and Sell Canada, regarding contract attribution, mentions that contracts awarded to Deloitte to develop the GCRA project have at least a value of several $100 million. And pursuant to 1083C, the committee order that CBSA produce in both official languages a copy or copies, unredacted copies of, first, all contracts currently in effect relating to the CGRA project beginning in 2018. B, all communications linked to the technical Deloitte 2018 task specification, and all communications of CBSA regarding the pilot project and the trials of the GCRA project since October 2028, and that the documents be produced to the clerk of the committee at the latest 15 days following the adoption of this motion, and that once the documents are received by members of the committee invite the leadership of CBSA to appear for a minimum of 2 hours here in committee in order to answer our questions about GCRA. So this is simply a motion regarding CBSA, and this is about another app that seems to be leading to cost overruns, uncontrolled levels of expense for the taxpayer. Thank you.
Oui.
Wonderful. You're at 3 minutes and 40 seconds, so you have 2.5 minutes left.
Merci. Madame Reza.
Thank you. Ms. Reza. We have learned over the last few weeks that CBSA, or despite the fact that CBSA clearly and very specifically put questions about the costs, the task authorizations, and the contracts related to ArriveCAN, they nevertheless did as they saw fit and did whatever they wanted. Would there be a way for PSPC to control matters a little more strictly, such that a department that uses contracting instruments truly respects the correct procedures? Thank you very much for the question. This is something that we're thinking about in great depth at present, given that we have a joint role. As we said earlier, we do bear responsibility for contracting procedures. But if the department client wishes to go ahead based on their own budget and their justifications for contracting, then we need to find a kind of in-between, a balance with them. So we do have a challenge function. And I must say that they took a good deal of our advice. They wished for a 3-year contract, and we said, no. We're in a pandemic, 3, 4, 5 months, perhaps a full year, but not beyond that. So we negotiated that matter with them. We also negotiated the per diem rights with them. That's another matter. So they took a lot of our advice, but towards the end, they decided that all said and done, they needed the tool. But as you've suggested, is there any possibility that between the Treasury Board and PSPC, we could come up with a clearer framework about final decision making? Perhaps. In my mind, I think that would be a good idea.
Mr. Bachrach, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Reza, a July 2023 article in the Globe and Mail included a text message from you regarding the November 2022 appearance of the CBSA at this committee. I wasn't on the committee at the time, but they've published this text that you sent after that committee appearance, and it said, quote, "All right. CBSA took a lot of questions. Members pushed a bit on GC strategies, but did not gain much ground. The bad news is that they ended up passing a resolution asking for the OPO, the Office of the Procurement Ombudsperson, to investigate ArriveCan contracting." Why was that bad news, given your government's commitment to transparency? And given the fact that in your opening statement, you said that you welcomed the OPO's recommendations. I'm just unclear why it's bad news that this committee moved to ask for an investigation of the ArriveCan contracting.
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. And I have to say, I've often regretted my words, and I'll say, frankly, at heart, I'm an administrator. And we had just been through the AG report for McKinsey, the OPO report for McKinsey, and every time there's a new request, we have to pivot resources to support it. We have to make sure that we have translation capacity to submit it to the House bilingually. We have to make sure that we have ATIP people on standby. So I responded in the heat of the moment in terms of the workload as an administrator to make sure that we had the resources to support it. As the months progressed, the value is now much more evident. And again, it was really written from the fact that I was thinking about it as an administrative burden in the heat of many other audits that were underway.
Fair enough. I guess I read something else into it. It sounds like you don't want the committee to get to the bottom of what happened. But I'll move on to the next question. In your opening statements, you talked a little bit about the findings of the procurement ombudsperson, found that certain practices related to the procurement of professional services were inconsistent with government policy and threatened the government's commitment to fairness, openness, and transparency. Now, you've accepted these findings from the OPO. Does that not indicate that your department failed to respect government policy? They were inconsistent with government policy, and the department that was responsible was your department. Did the department fail to uphold government policy?
Thank you very much for the question. I think that when we look at the OPO report, the Procurement Ombudsman's reports, we agreed with the recommendations. And in fact, when I looked at that statement in my opening remark, I thought often about the poor consideration we gave of best value. So it's a little bit of a shared responsibility in procurement. So you ask if it's 100% on one or the other. Both the central organization of PSPC and the client department of CBSA have shared some burden of this.
Yeah, you spoke to accepting the recommendations. This is a finding, I believe, not a recommendation. Do you also accept the findings of the ombudsperson?
Absolutely. So the findings are around the prescriptive, yes? Sorry.
One of the findings is that the department's actions were inconsistent with government policy, and to me that seems like a fairly serious thing. What I'm trying to get at is accountability. In your view, what accountability does the department have for not upholding the government's policy around their commitment to fairness, openness, and transparency?
Yeah. The PSPC is accountable for the procurement process when it is the contracting authority. So We are
like
accountable.
PSPC is not an amorphous entity. Like there are people in positions with responsibilities. Which people are accountable for the fact that PSPC did not uphold government policy?
Well, I think it is across the contracting authority. It's hard to put it on one person. Is it the procurement officer? Is it working in, there is a line of accountability, and we are looking at making sure that the practices around it become more consistent. The procurement ombudsman's, I see that you're frowning, but the procurement ombudsman's report focused on several things. Inconsistent documentation. So we're taking accountability for that. The use of the price bands, which were designed to try to create, a fair and open, transparent procurement process for SMEs. We're taking accountability to see how we can change it. And the two other key recommendations that we feel are about accountability are around this issue of swapping out resources, as well as the prescriptive procurement that was associated with GC strategies in a competitive process.
I guess to me, Ms. Reza, these seem like fairly egregious oversights. And my question was really about individual accountability. And accountability to me means that when government policy is so egregiously ignored, that there should be individual accountability, not sort of we all share a piece of the puzzle and everyone's to blame a little bit, but no one in particular. These are hierarchical organizations. It's why there are titles like assistant and associate and deputy and minister. Where does the buck stop?
A brief answer, please.
Well, I mean, it is a construct.
Well, the bucks didn't stop. They just kept going out.
Yeah,
but
I mean,
Yeah, I'm afraid that is our time. Mrs. Kusi, and perhaps Ms. Reza, you can get back to us in writing with for Mr. Backrack's question. Mrs. Kusi, please, for 5.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, Ms. Reza, my team just wanted to verify that you're in the room by yourself. There was just some concern around the table. Okay, thank you very much for verifying that. I want to go back to this story in the press today, which is just absolutely breathtaking, that the ArriveCAN file was absent from the list of delicate files submitted to the minister. And it was 10 files. It's astounding to me that out of 10 files, ArriveCAN was not in that top 10. What was in that was the National Shipbuilding Strategy, F-35 fighter jets, CP-140 Aurora, 16 P-8 A-8 Poseidon, the dental care program, and yet somehow ArriveCAN, an issue that had been relevant for 10 months prior to the arrival of the minister, was excluded from this. Now, I understand, Ms. Reza, that you did not arrive in your position until November 2nd of 2023, as per your bio on the internet. But previous to that, you were, of course, the Associate Deputy Minister. So did you not have a hand in preparing that briefing book? Certainly, I think that as the Associate Deputy Minister, may I ask who your predecessor was, please?
Paul Thompson.
Yes, did Mr. Thompson not work in tandem with you, or did you not work in tandem with Mr. Thompson to prepare this briefing binder, which would have left out this all-important issue?
Thank you very much. And just to confirm, I am alone because I am sick at home. And in terms of my participation, I certainly participated in creating the briefing material. I was on vacation at the time. However, again, I want to reemphasize that this was to onboard Minister Duclos in a very large portfolio with very many different possibilities of files coming up in the immediacy. There was no intent not to bring that on in terms of ArriveCAN as an immediate. It was under review by the Auditor General at the time.
Yeah, and for all of these reasons, it's still shocking to me that this was not included in a binder. I have the very good fortune of being a public servant for close to 15 years. One of those years was in a ministerial office, and I can't fathom leaving out an issue so big that could potentially bring down the government, even, I would dare say, that it would be excluded from such a binder. When Minister Duclos arrived, did he ask any questions about ArriveCAN? Certainly he must have been interested in an immediate brief on such an important issue, an issue that has seized the the Canadian press in recent months? Did he ask for an update on this, noting the absence from out of 10 issues, noting the absence from the briefing book?
Thank you very much for your question. As I noted, over the course of the fall, the Butler allegations came out as the AG report in preparation for the OGO committee. As we say, more on GC strategies, more briefings occurred with the minister's office and with the minister.
Right. And but can you expand then upon your conversations? Did he ever raise concern about this then $54 million app, which we know now is a minimum of $60 million, probably even more because the documentation wasn't correct? Did he ask for more specifics about it? Did he raise any concern about a two-person IT company? Did he ask for a full inventory of this two-person IT company? Can you recall anything that he asked for specifically relative to this, since it was absent from the briefing book?
Thank you very much for your question. As I've noted, when we came even in November or December to OGO with the minister to talk about, we had a conversation about ArriveCAN. He had been briefed. He had shown an interest in understanding. He was very concerned about the probity of the contracting and the contracting authorities and the spend at GC Strategies and what the department was doing in terms of lessons learned.
Right. Now, I certainly hope Minister Jaczek did a good job, or would have done a good job of briefing him relative to this briefing book. Certainly, as an incoming minister, I would have this expectation of my colleague to provide me a briefing of the most important issue in procurement at the time. Was it ever suggested to the minister to talk to cabinet colleagues, the Minister of Public Safety, about what's going on in ArriveCAN, anything like that?
Thank you very much. I will have to defer to the minister on those discussions. We spent a lot of time at PSPC talking to Public Health Agency and talking to CBSA to better understand the contracts.
Ever briefed the Prime Minister on ArriveCAN after it being excluded from the briefing book? Hopefully he recognized the importance of the issue, received some briefing somewhere, somehow, and then talked to the Prime Minister about it. Did this ever happen?
I have not spoken to the Prime Minister about this.
But did the minister speak to the Prime Minister
I'm sorry,
about ArriveCAN? As his issue, wanting to inform the Prime Minister of what is possibly the most important issue of since the 2021 election.
Yeah, that is our time.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Mr. Baines, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our Department from Public Works and Government Services for joining us. I want to go back to the Auditor General's report. I asked questions to the Auditor General. Who are the officials that need to be reported to? Where does the information go? How far does it go? Are officials involved? And she alluded to the fact that it goes up to the deputy. So you being a deputy minister here, you're getting all this information. At the same time, the Auditor General indicated that there were several documents missing. You know, is there not a responsibility to identify the fact that, hey, there's missing documents? And I think, again, to my colleague across who's asking a similar frame of questions, I wanted to know about, and you said you're an administrator. So as an administrator, it would be something that you would be really keen on following processes that are in place. So are our administrators here failing to follow the processes, or are the processes not clear in this specific situation? Let's talk about with ArriveCAN.
In procurement, we strive very hard on the processes to follow them and make sure they're replicable so we can ensure consistency. One of those goals is to minimize and prevent irregularities. In this case, processes cannot eliminate misconduct altogether. We can rely on it. We can make sure that it's clear and transparent and that there's guidelines and a framework around how to follow it. But because the desire is that the outcome of following process is open, fair, and transparent. We've spoken a lot about missing documentation. I came to OGO in November, December timeline, and I said very clearly that I authorized 2 of the contracts at GC Strategies. There's documentation to support it. The AG herself referred to the challenge function that we did at that time. So again, it's making sure that we have the documentation on file to be able to demonstrate that we followed and enforced the rules and guidelines that are put in place by the system around procurement.
And at what time? So now looking back, like when did you notice that these processes aren't like? Where are the missing documents, and where were the processes not followed? Like who didn't follow them? And if we listen to what the Auditor General said herself, each department is responsible for its own contracts, and we can't have the Auditor General, of course, verifying every department if they've done their work. So. And we're seeing, I've been in this committee only for the Mighty Ogo for only a short time, and I know the chair likes that. But we've studied a number of different studies. We've looked at things like the Governor General's trip, and I'm sure the Governor General would be happy with a club sandwich and maybe an apple juice, but we had beef Wellington served. Like, which administrators are making these decisions? So, like, that's what I'm trying to get to. Like, these processes, are they in place? Are they being followed? How deep do we have to look at these processes, and what other measures can we put in place to make sure that our administrators are following them?
Thank you very much for the question. I would add that it's a shared responsibility. Procurement has many steps to it. Solicitation processes, procurement processes, evaluation, negotiation, contract approval, contract administration. Many of those responsibilities fall with client departments who have a budget, a need, and a priority to do something. They will, depending on the dollar value, come to PSPC for assistance with that procurement process. And we provide guidance and, to a certain extent, where possible, oversight to ensure it's fair, open, and transparent. It is through many different delegated levels of authority and many different contract authority and client responsibilities as managers signing off on the goods that they've received, that you're able to start to see the whole landscape of that shared accountability.
Okay, so what is you or someone else in PSPC signing off on? What information is included?
So I can give you an example for what I authorized for 2 contracts that were related
Sorry,
to...
let me just interrupt. You only have about 20 seconds. If you can be brief or perhaps offer it in writing, but please go ahead.
I can be very brief. So there's a contract authority form. For example, I authorized a contract to GC Strategies as and when needed for CBSA to have IT staff augmentation. They verified the rates were competitive, that it was pulled from a pre-qualified instrument, that they were a vendor in good standing at that time.
Thanks, Mr. Baines. Mrs. Vignola, please, for 2.5.
Rapidement.
Quickly, Ms. Reza, in 2017 to 2020, who was, basically this was over the time when the SSC was advised of a problem, who was minister? So which years? 2019 to 2020, I'm sorry. I think that Mr. Annan and Mr. Tassi. Did these ministers, were they made aware of the cost overruns and the warnings that procurement had given CBSA regarding ArriveCAN? I would say no, but I would like to explain something of the greatest importance that I rarely have a chance to provide information about. There were no contracts at that time in 2020 and in 2021 that dealt directly with ArriveCAN. This was a contract awarded to help the CBSA with IT across their line of priority tasks. So it would have been very difficult at that time, before it was announced that they were building an app, for us to say that we were providing contracting instruments directly related to ArriveCAN. So all said and done, CBSA, and I just want to be sure I've got this right here, CBSA received sums for IT and was authorized to use these sums as they thought fit, as they judged. And so ArriveCAN, is it possible that it cost more than expected because it was more difficult to find? I mean, among that sum for IT, what amount was actually being used for ArriveCAN at the time and which was being used for, I don't know, IT material or computers or to update their systems at the time. So is that what you're saying? I think that there's a nuance. When we started to assist CBSA, we were in a pandemic. In 2020, they came to us and said, we need IT capacity because we haven't the internal capacity to allow us to create the technology that we now need to ensure that their entire line of priority activities, cargo, postal, people, and officers of the borders would be safe. So the first contracts that were awarded do not mention ArriveCAN. As you may have understood then, the Auditor General said as much as well, that she couldn't tell what part of the sum went for what.
Mr. Bachrach, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Reza, PSPC was initially opposed to the CBSA's use of a non-competitive contract for ArriveCAN. After you provided that advice to them, what happened after that?
So thank you very much for the question. And I actually think the Auditor General at PACP yesterday, Deputy Auditor General suggested that it would be helpful to share the email trail to be able to demonstrate. So just to walk through what it looked like, CBSA approached the procurement authority and asked to have a sole source contract or a non-competitive contract that was multi-year. The officer pushed back and said that that would not be kind of within the frame of an emergency, the pandemic. So that was reduced to 1 year and the cost was substantially reduced. The second area was that the per diems were renegotiated downwards to be able to be more competitive and in line with what we saw in that category. And the third thing that was done was that there was a pretty thorough challenge on the sole source justification that CBSA provided, indicating that they had a compelling need for this. When they came back, CBSA came back, we asked them to demonstrate the compelling need. We also shared it with our legal counsel to ensure that it really met that threshold. In the end, it's their decision and their compelling argument to keep the border open.
The Ombudsman noted in his report that there was a gap in emails between CBSA and PSPC. What happened to those emails? Why is there a gap?
I am unsure if that gap is related to this sole source. I think it was related to another contract later on in 2021, if I read it in his report correctly. That being said, I've also asked, for follow-up. I would bring back to your attention or bring to the committee's attention that during April, May, June, onwards in 2020, all of PSPC and all government employees were working from home. We didn't actually have VPN. We didn't have network. There was rolling blackouts, so people didn't actually have access to their emails. We had to come on certain times. I wondered if that was part of the issue. I've also wondered if, there are actual hard copy files. In normal circumstances, there would be a paper documentation in a file cabinet somewhere at PSPC. So looking at the different reliance and going back forward to see if we can find more of that information trail. We're doing that work as we speak.
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
Can I assume that those will be provided to the committee when they're located? I can't imagine that they don't exist somewhere, regardless of the situation. These things are out there somewhere. Could you table those with the committee when they're located?
We will table what we have now because we think this will also be relevant in terms of seeing what the contract approval documentation looks like, as well as the back and forth between the departments to have a sense of the roles and responsibilities. And we will continue to add more as we go.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mr. Genuis. Then Mr. Sousa.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I am fundamentally perplexed about the role that your department is sort of supposed to be playing. If the decisions are ultimately made by the department, in this case CBSA, and if you provide a recommendation not to proceed with a procurement, but they sort of do it anyways, and if your minister, the minister who's supposed to be responsible for all this, is not being briefed on a core file, I guess I'm just trying to understand what you do, like what value are you adding as a department to the government of Canada?
Thank you very much for the question. I think, again, I'm going to go back to the fact that we focus on the procurement process. The client department has a responsibility to provide the value, to be able to judge whether or not they got value for money for the procurement. In this case, we heard from the AG very clearly that that was not something doable. PSPC's remit is to ensure best value in the procurement process and ensuring that the tools are the right tools for the procurement that is being tendered. In this case, as you can see, it was not well able to provide that condition for best value, and we have to temper it by the pandemic and the various elements that were going on there.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. I understood you to say that you're focused on the procurement process. Of course, there are academics, PhD students who focus on the procurement process as well, insofar as they study how it works. Your job as a government department, I think, is to focus on the procurement process, but also to exercise some power or impact over that process. That is to actually shape decisions. If you're not doing that, if things can go so far awry and you're not exercising power over those decisions, and you're not briefing the minister who's supposed to be responsible, then I guess I'll just ask the question again. So what value are you adding to the process? You're focusing on it, but what are you doing?
Well, we're focusing on it to try to manage and mitigate risk and ensure best value for Canadians and drive down the cost to procurement and seek efficiencies. There are shared responsibilities. So if you come as a department that comes and looks to say we want to procure X or Y, we provide that overview of how best to procure that in a way that's efficient for Canadians.
In the case of ArriveCan, your recommendation was not followed, and you're not able to tell us who was responsible, either on your side or in the case of the other department. So, if theoretically you're supposed to exercise some shared responsibility, you didn't in this case, right? So,
thank you very much for the question. The authority to enter into a contract for the Government of Canada rests with the contracting authority. In this case, it was PSPC. So we actually have the documentation of who provided the authority to enter into a contract, who signed the contracts. What has been very difficult is understanding the choice of GC strategies, the sole source choice of GC strategies, and the compelling sole source justification provided by CBSA. There is material on file, and again, it is a shared responsibility.
Okay, but they're the ones who made the decision. You're saying you don't know how or why they made the decision. I guess, would you acknowledge, at least in this case, that your department did nothing or added no value? And what's the minister supposed to be doing in the process?
Okay, thank you very much. I will not acknowledge that. I will describe once again what we've done. We ensured that the firm that they chose was a firm that was eligible, that was on a pre-competitive, had been pre-qualified on a competitive tool that has evaluation criteria that's published. We ensured that the price band...
if GC strategies could have been on that pre-qualified list, we clearly have a broken system. You ensured narrow compliance with them being on a list. You identified that they shouldn't be given the contract. They were given the contract anyways. how many people work at the department, and what would you say to taxpayers who just don't understand what the point of all this is?
Just brief answer, please.
Well, I would. Sorry, I would say this. I would say that PSPC during the pandemic did $20 billion of procurement on behalf of Canadians for PPE, medical equipment, procurement of vaccines, and keeping many different departments up and running. We've had several clean audits from the Auditor General, and the value that we provided was on the procurement process.
Thanks very much. Mr. Sousa, please, to wrap up today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Deputy, for being there. And the Assistant Deputy Ministers, I'm sorry we haven't had a chance to really talk, but in this case, if time permits, we may. So, Deputy, just to be clear, GC Strategies at the time of the pandemic was on a pre-approved list, meaning that they had already proven themselves in past occasions as an authorized supplier. Is that correct?
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. That is correct, and they were in good standing at the time.
And did the previous government, I believe Pierre Poilievre, also authorize GC Strategies in previous contracts? Is that correct? Or the principles of GC Strategies?
Thank you very much for the question. Their existence predates 2015.
So it was there prior, and they were on a list as a consequence of those periods of time. Can you explain to me how many contracts the government does on an annual basis?
How many contracts the government does?
How many submissions come before you?
Well, thank you very much for the question. I think that there's approximately 100,000 transactions that are contracts, amendments, supply arrangements that the government does, valuing about $34 billion. PSPC does the vast volume, but I think it's very important to underscore to this committee that we only do about 7% of the actual volume of contract documentation.
So there is work being done by PSPC, notwithstanding some of the comments made by my colleagues on the other side, just to verify that you do quite a bit of advising and quite a bit of work. And in regards to that, there has been this confusion over the cost of ArriveCan, and rightly so, because the Auditor General has cited that they had very difficult time trying to address what it entailed. But can you explain to me how this project would have only cost $80,000?
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. I think that my first explanation is that here at PSPC, we did not contract for anything for $80,000. We provided contracts for staff augmentation. So right off the bat in April, if we're signing a contract for $2.5 million or $2.35 million, that money was being used within CBSA or that contract to cross many different business lines. So as the Auditor General herself noted in her report, she estimated the cost as a sub-cost of the contracts that we put in place. We have no visibility on that.
There's also been a lot of discussion after the Ombudsman's report about this notion of bait and switch. Can you explain to this committee how this process works and what that means?
Thank you very much, Mr. For the question. I would note this. Often swaps occur. So when you are putting a bid together to respond to an RFP or some procurement vehicle that's being put in place by the government, you as a resource attest that you're available to do the work. Then the process takes a while, you've been offered another job, and when it comes to the bid being awarded into a contract, that resource is no longer available. What then happens is that they have to provide a minimum mandatory requirement. If you need someone that's an astronaut, you have to provide someone that was an astronaut. So there's lots of different dimensions to swapping out resources. Sometimes you get better resources, sometimes you get better value. They have to have a minimum mandatory requirement. And those resources, we are now looking at whether or not we should have named resources or not. There may be more value in not having named resources and only named competencies. So this is an area that we're very interested in. And I would also note that the ombudsman noted that there was a 76% resource swap out. That is relatively significant. It was during COVID. It was also the fact that GC Strategies provided close to 100 resources at CBSA. So there was a volume there as well of work that has to be done.
Do I have some time, Mr. Chair? 30 seconds. Can we talk about cost overruns? There's this notion now that this app became something that was 80,000, which is not true. It was never suggested that it was 80,000, but it's blown up and it's expanded. Can you explain what has happened and how this accumulated over that period of time?
Thank you very much. Again, these questions might be better for CBSA, but I would add very quickly that you have to imagine an app at the border is going to require, that was built for the Public Health Agency, has to link into all kinds of different health jurisdictions across Canada, has to be bilingual, has to be accessible, has to be cybersecurity, has to be tested, has to be built across many different layers. So all that infrastructure, all that cloud support, all the actual costs in terms of release and rolling it out is probably where the cost is associated with it.
Thank you very much, Ms. Reza. Thanks for joining us today. It's always a pleasure to have you at OGO. Mr. Laporte and Ms. Poulin, thank you for all your interventions today. Before we go, Ms. Reza, would you you mentioned that you approved 2 of the GC Strategies contracts. Would you be able to provide just a quick email, the details of that and whether they were sole source or just regular ones? Thanks, everyone.
I authorized them and we'll do it.
Perfect. Thank you for our witnesses for sticking around late. Colleagues, everyone else, thanks for sticking around late. Unless there's anything else, we will adjourn.